campus. I am Darnell Fennell. I am the Director of Social Entrepreneurship with the MBA, and I've been in this role now for almost a year in May. And as we get started, I want to inform you the webinar is being recorded and will be available for future use on our MBA website on mbacares.org. Before we begin this webinar, I want to pause and recognize that we are all impacted by COVID-19. I want to send my prayers of care and compassion to you all, as well as your communities. Today's topic is the sacred act of interviewing the people you serve. My assumption is that you are on this webinar because in some capacity you serve people, whether that's in your vocational capacity or just on your faith journey, maybe in a volunteer role. You feel a call to serve. So welcome, Yanni. I'm going to tell you a bit about this session. In this session, we will practice the interviewing and deep listening skills that are core to this work. And we will do so on the foundation of theology, using the text that I sent out yesterday by Martin Buber, groundbreaking and timeless book, I and Thou. We will explore how to be fully present with one another, how to listen for moments of divine inspiration, and how to take these gleanings with us, making a lasting, positive social impact in a world that is so desperately needs it. Today, our presenter will be none other than Rabbi Elan Babchuck, and we have met recently during my time here with MBA, and I'm grateful for our friendship as it continues to grow, and look forward to continue to do collaborative work. He's a great light in the world, and one of the ways he shines that light is as the founding director of the Glean Network, which is an incubator and a network for entrepreneurs who are building new models of faith in action, and the director of innovation at Cloud, a think tank focused on the future of faith in America. And he's blessed to live and learn with his wife, Lizzie, and their two children, Micah and Nessa, in Providence, Rhode Island. And he likes to read broadly, cook adventurously, and find sanctuary on the rock climbing walls of New England. So we welcome him today. And whether you are an ED, a social entrepreneur, or a local pastor, or just a layperson, I do believe today's conversation will be both formative for us all as we continue to live out our values and faith in this very rapidly changing world. So because we usually would have Q&A at the end, but because this will be more didactical, we will share it together. There'll be a break-off component, but definitely feel free if there's any questions that emerge. We can create a parking lot in the chat and address those questions toward the end. Now I put this in my friend, my brother Elan's hands to lead us now.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And just to give everyone a sense of just how long Darnell and I have been thinking about this webinar, I now have 3 kids. So we were graced by the arrival of our daughter just about 3.5, almost 4 months ago. And thank God she's happy and healthy and has no idea what is happening in the world. What a blessing to be here. I'm really grateful that we have this opportunity to be together. I've already got to spend a good chunk of the morning with Yanni, who is in our cohort. We have a partnership with Columbia Business School with a fellowship called the START Fellowship for Spiritual Entrepreneurs. And really grateful to be learning with Yanni over the last 10 weeks and all the more so now. So I thought what we would do as kind of a warm-up to get us into the mindset around storytelling and interviewing and listening is I thought we would each share our origin stories. So you ask someone to tell you an origin story, usually, you got to buckle up because it's going to be a long story. But here I'm going to give you a very tight constraint. So the origin story comes in 3 parts. Part 1 is it used to be. I'm even going to type this as we talk. Part 1, it used to be ... 2, until one day 3. And so now, and I use this framework, it was taught to me by a friend of mine, Rabbi Miriam Turlinchamp. This framework for origin stories is a great way to not only tell us a little bit about where you came from, a little bit about where you're at today, but also kind of pinpoint that moment of calling, or the way that Echoing Green, which is a fantastic organization that's been training social entrepreneurs for a very long time, Echoing Green calls it a moment of obligation. There's a moment, that until one day moment, when whatever it is that the world was doing before that day, whatever it is that you were doing before that day, that was the day everything changed for you. And we often think of our lives in binary modes. Like, it was before this thing that happened, that's what life was like. And now after this thing has happened, this is what life is like. And it's a very clean way to reflect and reframe the lives that we've already lived in order to help explain where we're at today. So I thought, as a way for us to just kind of check in and get to know one another, rather than, who are you, where are you from, and what's your job, rather to tell this story. And if you want to also share with us who you are and kind of where you're coming from, and what you do with your time, that's great too. So maybe just take 1 minute to see if you can write. I know that's not a lot of time to write your origin story. It's not a memoir, just a quick origin story. So take 1 minute and come up with whatever framework you want to use to answer that prompt. And then whenever anyone is called to chime in, that'll be the first origin story we get to hear. And try to, if we can, try to keep the origin stories down to a minute or so. Sound okay? Great.
Somebody need to get it started?
Please.
Okay, so try not to make it an hour long. It used to be that I was from southwestern Ontario, small town lawyer who moved to the far north of Canada to be a lawyer with the government, and did that kind of work for many years, was part of the creation of Nunavut, and later found myself working in the government in Saskatchewan with First Nations and Métis people. And then one day, moderator of the United Church of Canada, who had been my minister in Yellowknife, came to visit and said, we're looking for a new general secretary. Now I find myself Canada at a very interesting time, where we've just closed our office up in the house. Their schools are canceled for now, and so on. And we're trying to keep everybody's spirits lifted across the country. And I've just written my usually bi-weekly note. It's going to go to weekly for the time being, out to the church, ending with the words from our creed, which are, God is with us. We are not alone. Thanks be to God.
Thank you.
Yanni, are you talking?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. I saw the look. So it used to be that I was the founder of what's called the Peace Peoples Movement, essentially spreading peace and love all around the country and the world via the arts. So I have a band called Yanni and the Peace People, and I put about 6 albums out, and we also have a clothing line, and I self-published a book called Love Poems for Peace. And so just encouraging people all around peace and love and community. So that was the case for a while. And then I helped to found a church called Rise Community Church in Atlanta, Georgia. So stuck my toe into what it means to be a minister and a leader of a congregation, of a church plant. And from there, had the opportunity to serve as a teaching artist in India for 30 days. And while I was there, the question kind of came up, okay, God, what is next? And so, what was the next prompt? 1 second. So that was the case until one day God placed it in my heart that seminary was the next step. So I began seminary in the Bay, San Francisco Theological Seminary, where I was an intern and a pastor, an intern at a church, also teaching mindfulness and hip hop to about 900 students a week. And that was a great experience. Well, I guess I said until one day. Until one day I was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease at 28 years of age, literally in the middle of my matriculation through seminary. And so now I have received my kidney transplant, and I'm back feeling about 95% on a good day. And figuring out what it means to craft communal care for folks in the midst of these crises, in the midst of these diagnoses, in the midst of what I call chronic conditions versus chronic illnesses coming up. So chronic conditions coming up in body, mind, and spirit. And I'm the pastor of a church called Beloved Community in San Diego, which is now my third church plant. And so, yeah, figuring out what my nonprofit, my supernatural life will look like. In these very trying times of people being unwell and needing some supernatural help.
All right, I guess it's my turn then. My name's Kris Bentley, and I work at Lexington Theological Seminary. And I really was going to do it for just a minute. It used to be that I was a congregational pastor in Kentucky until one day I began working at Lexington Theological Seminary on a grant project 6.5 years ago. And so now I'm on a journey where I'm doing interviews and I'm living with a broader sense of discovery and collaboration in ministry, because I'm not just working in one congregation, but I'm working with learning from different pastors who live in our area. So
I'll share briefly to give us back some of the time, and I'll speak more from a theological origin story, which informs my vocation. I had kind of the same vocation since I was a teenager in the life of church. So I would say it used to be I saw faith as static and routine until one day I came to know liberation theology. And so now I seek to live out my faith in tangible and innovative ways, such as my role as the Director of Social Entrepreneurship at NBA.
Beautiful. Thank you all for giving us your origin stories and also kind of centering us in this moment. I think that's one of my favorite things about the origin stories. We can learn so much about people, and it also reveals so much about where their passions lie right now, because that whole second half, the "and so now," is that's what they're bringing to the table. And so I'm really grateful that you all did that. I'll share with you briefly mine, which is, it used to be that I thought the work to leave the world better than I found it was something I could do in my spare time, or something that I could do as my day job when I worked as a community organizer in Los Angeles. And then one day, I was hit by a pickup truck, and I was crossing the street, and this truck ran a red light, blew through a crosswalk, and going 40 miles an hour almost killed me. And it was in those ensuing months that as I was treated like a cash patient, it was a Friday night, and I didn't have my wallet on me because as a rabbi and a Jewish person, I don't carry my wallet on the Sabbath. And I was walking home, and I was treated like a cash patient in Los Angeles. I was taken to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and they have a whole different ward and a different floor where trauma patients are brought who don't have ID or who don't have health insurance, even though I, of course, had both of those things, but they were at home and I was unconscious. And so after being treated that way and seeing just how broken the system was, and so now working to leave the world better than it was when I found it is not something I can do in the margins, and not something I can just do as a day job. It is something that consumes me, and in the best of ways, and drives me with the most fervent of spirit and passion that of anything I've ever had and anything I've ever done in my life. I'm grateful to be able to do that now in the work that I do at Glean Network, by supporting faith-rooted leaders all around the world who are doing this kind of work, reimagining the role of faith in the world right now, and with a specific focus on how to leave the world better than it was when we found it. And judging by the way the world is right now, we have a lot of work to do. So with that in mind, I want to share with you one of the tools that I've used over the years. I've been an entrepreneur for about 20 years, and 22 years. And the one tool that I have found to be most valuable in the work, we think about entrepreneurship, you think about, all of the stuff you see on Shark Tank, and you see, well, it's got to be shiny and innovative, and it's got to be a great idea. And we have the myth of the garage, that this idea came to the person while they were in the shower, that light bulb moment. So many of these things are just myths, right? That actually the greatest source of revelation for me in the work of social entrepreneurship is not the idea that comes to you in the shower. It's listening to the person sitting across from you and putting yourself in that position to be sitting across from someone as often as humanly possible. Not just when you're at the early stages of trying to come up with a new program or initiative, and not just when you're trying to get their buy-in, right? But always. That any time, whether if 3 months have gone by and you haven't sat across from one of the people you're trying to serve, 3 months is too long, right? You have to be in constant communication with the people that you seek to serve, and you have to come at those conversations with a great deal of curiosity. So I'll tell you what I first did when I worked in the pulpit. I didn't grow up in a synagogue. I grew up in a lay-led community, lay-led Jewish community in the Boston area. We actually used to rent out a sanctuary at a church in town. So like my bar mitzvah was underneath a 30-foot cross. The community put together a quilt, and every Saturday morning they had this long pole, and they would lift up the quilt and hang it up over the cross, and then right afterwards bring it down. So anyway, working inside of a large synagogue, this was a small, tight-knit community. But when I started working as a rabbi, it was for a community of 850 families, or about 2,000 people. And, you show up on day one and they give you a portfolio, and this is the work you do. You're going to lead a service this day, and you're going to teach a class this day, and you're going to visit these people that day and go do this that day. So that sounds great. I'll do it. And, it's an 80-hour-a-week job. Even if you're doing it efficiently, it's easily 80 hours a week. And immediately kind of got caught up in that, just the cycle of constantly trying to get the work done and, and to follow that script. And One Friday morning, I was out getting a cup of coffee, and I hadn't yet thought of the idea of doing office hours in this coffee shop because, well, I work in the building, right? I work inside of a synagogue building, so I should be in the building all the time, even if none of my congregants actually go to the building 95% of the time. I have to be there in my office. So I'm there getting a cup of coffee, and I look around, and there's a bunch of people in my neighborhood. I live in Providence, Rhode Island, not a big city. There's a bunch of people I've never seen before at this coffee shop. And I'm looking, and it's a Friday morning, and like 5, 6, 7 people who are in line buy a challah, which is, a traditional bread that we eat on Friday nights and Saturdays throughout Shabbat in the Jewish community. And I'm thinking that's kind of interesting. I'm in a relatively small city, and we have 2,000 people in our community, and I don't know one of these people, and all of them are buying challah. This is kind of an interesting moment, right? So I just sat down, and I wear a kippah, I wear a head covering, and I happened to have a book of Talmud with me that morning. I was studying the Talmud. I read 1 page a day. And I sat down, and I started studying Talmud with my mug of coffee, and someone comes up to me when they're on the way out. They're holding the challah in their arm, and they say, "Excuse me, are you a rabbi?" And I said, "Yeah, what gave it away?" And they said, "Well, you should know I'm a very bad Jew." And I said, "Well, what do you mean you're a bad Jew? There's no such thing as a bad Jew." So they say, "Well, I don't really like going to, I don't really like going to sort of performative prayer services, and I stopped going after my bar mitzvah, and I don't really believe in the God who smites people. I don't even understand what smiting is and what's with all the smiting, and so that's what makes me a bad Jew." And I said, "Great. Well, I don't believe in that God either. And I also don't like going to those services. So let's start a club right now. We'll have the Bad Jew Club, and we'll just sit here and have coffee together." So that person ended up sitting down, and I interviewed them for an hour about what their life was like. Not just about what's going to get you to come to synagogue, what's going to get you to be a member. I didn't try to sell one thing, right? I wasn't even sure that I believed in what I would have sold to them, even if that was my mode. But what I focused on was, let your life be my scripture for the next hour, right? Let your stories be my scripture. Let your life be my liturgy for the next hour. And I'm just going to listen. That's what I'm here to do right now. That's what I'm called to do. Within 6 months, that person became one of my key lay people, ultimately creating a whole community around her own interests, around the things that she was passionate about, and it wasn't about getting her to be a member of the synagogue, and it wasn't about what it was about activating her passion based on the stories she told me. It was about being fully present with those stories so that I could hear the stories between the stories and the words between the lines. And when you can do that and be fully present, and this was just one person. So ultimately, of course, I started having office hours at that same coffee shop, 7 Stars Bakery in Providence, Rhode Island. If you ever come visit, you should come get a cup of coffee. It's closed right now, obviously. But God willing, it'll open again soon. But what this pushed me to do was do 100 interviews in my first 100 days on the job. And then ultimately to set up meetings with as many of those 2,000 plus people who were part of our community as would answer my phone calls. Right? And that allowed me ultimately, and the team around me, to respond to the needs that were not so clearly there, right? You can't just send out a survey and say, "What are you yearning for? Fill in the blank." Or, give me the drop-down menu. And we certainly can't read minds or intuit what people's core timeless needs are. And I think it's malpractice if we just take a guess. So the only way to actually understand how to serve the people that you want to serve is by listening to their stories, right? Is by looking for what we call the divine spark in that person, by sitting across from them knee to knee, studying their lives like you would study scripture, and listening for opportunities to better serve them, listening for the gaps in their lives that they want to have filled. So I want to share with you a piece of text that for me has been just an unbelievably formative piece of text. Everybody, you got it in your email before, right? So we're going to study a little bit of Martin Buber. I'll tell you a little bit about him. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go into breakouts. and just study a couple of pages each. But what I want to share with you is this, paradigm called I, thou, this idea that there are really two different ways to interact with other people in the world, two different ways. And first, let me tell you about Martin Buber, and then I want to tell you about these two different ways. So Martin Buber was born in Vienna in 1878. He died in 1965. He was a philosopher and a theologian, and he lectured at the University of Frankfurt until the rise of Nazi power, and then ultimately left in 1933. Settled in Palestine in 1938, and lectured in social philosophy at Hebrew U until he retired in 1951. And I want to share with you one quote that I think will, if you're watching this, recorded, and you have to log off and all you had was this time, love is responsibility of an I for a you. In this consists what cannot consist in any feeling, the equality of all lovers. Now, not lovers in the sense of lovers, but lovers in the sense of one person who can love another. One person who can love another's story. One person who can love another's yearnings and hopes and dreams and passions and needs and wants and pains and gains. And then for that person to share abundantly with the other is also an act of love too. So what we're going to do, I'll ask you to open up that handout that you all have. We're going to go into breakouts. Let's see how we're going to do this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 of us here. So I'm going to put all of you, and Darnell, you're going to be in a group. I'm going to put you into just 2 groups of 2. And what I want to ask you to do is, I want you to just, as you're reading through it, I want you to look for 2, I want you to fill out essentially a chart, a little table. You can make scribble it in handwriting right in front of you. I want you to write at the top of one column, I, and at the top of another column, thou. I'm sorry, I just got that wrong. I/it on one of them, and I/thou on the other one. I, it, and I, thou. Now, essentially, the way Buber frames the distinction between an I-it relationship and an I-thou relationship is an I-it relationship is much more transactional. It's a relationship where you are the subject. You are the object in this. Oh, going to get a notebook. Great. No problem, Nora. So where you are an object to me, right? In other words, I'm not so concerned about diving deep into a relationship with you and being fully present with all that you are from a holistic standpoint as an extension and an expression of the divine image. We have maybe a piece of business to do and that's it. Or I want to give you a piece of information and that's it. I-thou, on the other side, is where the divine spark lies. That from a theological standpoint, when we are looking for God in the world, God shows up as a divine spark, a tiny little divine spark that exists between 2 people who are in an I-thou relationship, who are there to lift one another up, to love one another, to be present with one another, and to fully listen to one another. It's a really hard thing to define, but as you start reading the pages, you'll immediately see, okay, Buber's saying an I-it relationship. Here's an example, or here's an adjective of that kind of relationship. And then the corollary to it, here's an adjective that would describe an I-thou kind of relationship. So what I want you to do, and you're only going to take 5 minutes to do this, so we're going to speed read, and it's totally okay, is I want group 1 to take, I'm just going to open up the document. Let's see who's going to be group 1. Let me open this up. Okay. Darnell and Nora, although, wait, is Nora back yet? Nora, are you back yet? When Nora gets back, I'm going to put Darnell and Nora into a group together.
I'm back. Yep.
Oh, great. Hey, welcome back, Nora. Okay. So Darnell and Nora are going to be together, and Kris and Yanni are going to be together. And let me open up the document. So I want you to scroll down to the 4th page in the document. And it opens up to man, the world is twofold in accordance with his twofold attitude. Does everyone see that? Just a show of hands? Yeah? Great. So Darnell and Nora, you're going to read pages 4, 5, and 6. And Yanni and Kris, you're going to read 7, 8, and 9, right up until that star in the middle. And when we come back together, what I want to ask you to do is share which words and descriptions of I, it, or I, thou fit into each of those 2 columns that you filled out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, can you remind us the 2 columns? Because that's when I was having
Oh,
trouble with the
yeah.
internet.
So one column is I, it. You can do I/it or I-it. And the other column is I, thou.
Right, okay.
And those are the 2 different kinds of relationships that Buber is offering. And so what we're going to do after you do this is we're just going to sort of popcorn around and come up with what you're going to share some of those different descriptions that you read in the text and that showed up for you. And then what I want to do is translate these different kinds of relationships into the work of social entrepreneurship, right? Into the work of communal leadership, into the work of being a pastor in a community. And then hopefully walk away with 2 different kinds of modes, right? Of intentionalities to bring into relationship with others. Does that make sense? Great. Great. And then we might even talk about a couple of ways that you can use them in your interviews that you might do with your community members. Okay, so I'm going to set you up in breakouts. I'm going to do that right now. Let's do it manually. Darnell and Nora, Yanni and Kris. Okay, I'm opening up the rooms, and I will see you all in about 5-6 minutes, okay? Okay, so let's popcorn around. You can all unmute yourselves, and let's offer some of those pairs, the I, it versus I, thou. What were some that you saw in the text?
Well, with the I, thou, it's spoken with the whole being, and the I, that isn't with the whole being. It's more of a surface thing.
Great. So what does that tell you, right? That an I-thou relationship allows people to show up how?
I guess being more open and to communicate in more depth.
Yes. When you can show up wearing all of your hats and all of your identities, and you don't need to parse them out and leave some at home and leave some at your worship community and leave some with your family and leave some. When you can bring your whole self into relationship and into conversation, that level of trust and vulnerability allows you to really be fully present and share so much more than you might otherwise have shared. Mm-hmm. And then of course, on the other side, think about how many different spaces demand that we only show up in one way, that we only show up with a little tiny part of ourselves. Right? How many of those, like if you show up at Starbucks and you're getting in line and you start crying because, oh my goodness, the weight of the world is so heavy, everyone's going to look at you like, why is that person crying? They're just going to get a latte. You can't show up whole in the middle of Starbucks with a bunch of strangers. Or, when there are plenty of spiritual communities that I've been a guest at or a speaker at where somebody, when they ask you how you're doing, if you give them a real answer to how you're doing, they're like, no, whoa. I just wanted to talk about the weather. Yikes. I don't want to know what you're actually carrying on your heart right now. That kind of distinction can be such a gift. If you can be in I-thou relationship with someone else, it allows them to show up whole. And that's where the real sparks can begin to emerge. Great. Nora, thank you so much for lifting that up. Okay, what else did we see?
So we had imagery of a tree. And so one thing I wrote down was I, it fragmented, but I, thou, a single whole. So along the lines of what we just said. And then also thinking about how with I, it, the value wasn't seen, but then when we transfer it to I, thou sort of thinking, we experience the value versus just kind of putting it aside and ignoring the value that it brings to our experience.
That's exactly right. That's it. And what else are we trying to do if not try to bring value into people's lives, right? To lift them up, to serve them, to help fill the needs, to alleviate the pain that they experience, to help them become the version of themselves and build the version of the world that they dream about. That's value. That's what we're trying to do. Great. What else? Yanni, thank you.
Another thing we explored in that was that the relationship is of mutuality. When we were thinking about the tree, what came to my mind is a lot of times we treat trees as if they're just raw material for our needs. That's not a mutual relationship. That's us just using them. Whereas if it's a mutual relationship, it goes both ways. The tree needs something from us. And that's closer to the reality of us breathing in breathing out carbon dioxide and breathing, that whole ecosystem thing. So.
That's right. Right. You ever read the book, The Giving Tree?
Yes, I don't like that book.
All the people, it's a beautiful book, but all the people who read that as a kid are like, oh, so that's what I can do to the earth?
Right.
You just keep taking, no big deal. Yeah, that's I, it. Mm-hmm. That is I, it. I, it is, I'm going to pull the apple off the tree and I have no concern with A, using the core for compost, or B, taking a seed and planting it.
And I believe that is a good segue to one of our other points. That the I, thou has no it for its object. When we operate in I, thou, there eliminates, it's no thing for its object. Exactly.
That's exactly right. How many times in our lives do we, and by the way, not every relationship can be I, thou, but let's just think about how many times in our lives the human being that's in the way, maybe they're driving a car that's in your way and you're in traffic, or maybe they're in line in front of you and they're taking forever to empty out the cart. And maybe all they are is they've been reduced to a thing, right? Or forget about the people who are, a pain in the neck or in your way. Maybe it's somebody, maybe it's at that very coffee shop and it's the person who's making your latte and you don't really want to know how that person's doing today. You just want the latte and you don't want to get in conversation. So that is an object in a relationship. That is a thing to the I, it. But in an I, thou, there is no thing.
Yeah, we digressed a bit talking about how it's easier to say, and in reality, sometimes we do focus on the function that somebody plays for us rather than the actual person themselves. One that I found really powerful is just the line about I, thou has no bounds. Because if you're the I, it, if it's limited to what you've got, there's some limitation. Once it's a combination with somebody else, I guess it's infinite number of possibilities.
Yeah, you think about the vows that are made, traditional wedding vows in sickness and in health and in what else? What else do we commit in that? Sickness and health. What else?
Richer for poor.
Richer for poor. What else?
To love and to cherish, honor.
Right. So what's it?
You say obey, but
yeah, I can do without that. Right. But what it's trying to tell us is that there are no bounds to this love. That when we stand here today in this union, there are no bounds to the love that we have. And that's an I, thou, right? That's that kind of love out in the world. That's that kind of love in a relationship, that there's nothing that can possibly limit that love. and it is because it is boundless. And boundless means that it is beyond our ability to understand in this moment. Boundless means the not knowing. That's where faith begins, right? The not knowing, the limits of our own knowledge and ability to understand, that's where faith takes root. And in a boundless relationship, it is the very not knowing that creates space for that divine spark for God to enter in. Right? And today of all days, this moment of all moments, we have so much more not knowing. There is so much more not knowing, and we can let it consume us with an anxiety, or we can let it be the root of the kind of love that the world needs most. We can let it be the thing that keeps us up at night, or we can let that not knowing be the thing that gets us out of bed in the morning. And we have that choice. Sometimes it does feel like it's out of our hands, but we have so much more not knowing than we did a week ago. And not knowing is the very thing around which faith is designed, around which religions are created. It's that not knowing. And I, thou, interestingly enough, you would think I, thou, the kind of relationship that does create space for the divine would be all about knowing and knowledge, but it's about the not knowing, which allows us to have faith. Faith in the other, faith that God's presence in this moment actually will lift us both up. And I don't even know how it's going to happen, but it will. So what else? What else did you see?
When I related the lessons to the human experience and engaging in these interviews, I thought of what it means for a person to be not human versus recognizing a person's humanity as we engage with them.
And what's that been like? So Yanni's a seasoned interviewer, but what's that like when you really recognize the humanity in the other in the context of an interview?
Right. Well, if I can bring in some of what you've been teaching us in class, I think it's not swaying our questions so that we receive a desired outcome with people's responses. For me, it brings in the thought of not manipulating people into saying what we want them to say, and really leaving the conversation open for, I guess, where spirit might rise up in terms of the questions we ask, and also leaving space for people's humanity and their true and authentic selves to shine through.
Mm. That is so beautiful, right? That's the difference, and this is not a knock on sales, but that's the difference between sales and entrepreneurship. Okay, and when I was serving as a rabbi, there were definitely times when I felt like, gosh, all my board really wants me to do is just get me to get more people to show up to services, and I'm just in spiritual sales here. That's my job, right? I don't want to be in spiritual sales. What I wanted to be is I want to be an entrepreneur of the spirit. I want to be somebody who is open to the complete humanity of the other, and who can then learn from that humanity and let it guide me. Let that be my light in everything that I do. Any last notes about this piece of text? And then we'll let's translate it into what that means for interviews, and then close out with any, additional questions. Well, let me ask you this. So I love that the tangent was actually exactly where you needed to be. The tangent was, we can't always be in I-thou relationships. Now, of course, like here I am telling you I-thou relationships are the best. We got to do it all the time. It's so important, etc. Oh, no problem, Kris. Thank you for being here. No. Glad to have you here. Actually, Darnell, let's do a quick time check. I don't know what the original time frame was for the webinar. Let me know about what
we have 10 more minutes.
Okay. Is that okay, Nora, Yanni? We okay with 10 minutes? Great. Okay. So I love that it went to this tangent. Where do you experience yourself in I-thou relationships? Give me a couple examples.
I have a few pastoral colleagues where it's this mutual experience of reciprocity and authenticity.
Certain times with friends and with those people, it isn't always that way. Sometimes we're trying to get something done, or there's something they need, or a need being met that seems more concrete rather than stepping back and having the conversation. And the weird thing is, and I kind of wanted to still do this webinar today, even though everything is so strange, because this might be a time when there's opportunity to do some things in different ways. We've been talking a lot about that. And even though we can't connect in person with one another, there might be occasion for some deeper connection. So this is something to think about, you know, as a challenge, using the tools we've got like we have today. And you know, we're in unusual times, but we're not cut off as we would be without these kind of tools. So.
Exactly right. There's two levels of the opportunity here. One is, we know right now people are socially isolated and want connections. So let's figure out, let's be really thoughtful and empathic and human-centered around what it is that people need, and find a way to get it to them and find a way to share it with them. And second, whenever it is that we emerge out of this surreal fog, whenever a new normal sets in, there will be such and I really believe this, there is going to be such a call for real, deep human connection, right? And it's actually going to push back against all of the platforms that have convinced us that real human connections are happening, right? There's going to be such a call and a yearning and a desire for that and so even if we're just practicing how to do some interviews now while we're all stuck online and in our homes and away from one another, let that be a jump off point for 2 months from now when we all go back, or 3 months from now, or whenever it is, when we all go back, to let that be a jump off point for us to launch ourselves into I-thou, or relaunch ourselves into I-thou. I think, you know, and this, I want to say a couple things now and just recognize the preciousness of time. I want to say a couple things. You can't be in I-thou all the time. But you can be in I-thou in some pretty unexpected places. Right? My dad used to be a labor side business consultant. So he would go to businesses and negotiate on behalf of the labor force at the business. So he was the son of a labor organizer from Lynn, Massachusetts. And my dad used to go on these business trips when I was a kid. And I would always want to know, what was the business trip like? What did you do? Abba, Abba means father in Hebrew. Abba, tell me about, like, who'd you talk to and what did you learn? And, what is the business like and what do they make and whatever. And you know what he would tell me? He would tell me the stories of the people he sat next to on the airplane. Every single time, right? And I would say, but I want to learn about your work. And he says, Elan, that is my work in the world. My work in the world is to sit next to the person on the airplane and remind them for an hour and a half or 3 hours or 5 hours that they're an extension, an emanation of the image of God, that every single one of us is created in that divine image. And even if there's one of those little armrests between the two of us, that doesn't mean there can't be a divine spark. The work of interviewing the people that you serve, right? And I say interviewing specifically because it's not a pastoral moment, and there are pastoral moments to be had. And it's not a sales moment, and there are sales moments, and it's not a cultivation moment or a stewardship moment or a thank you moment. those can be peppered in, and they're all a part of the work of leading in community. But an interview moment is about really intentionally lifting up the stories in their lives. When you're trying to figure out, how do I serve this person in ways that they're not being served right now? How do we come up with a new strategy to have real impact on their lives? And then together maybe work to leave the world a little bit better than it was when we found it. You're not going to lift that up in a survey, and you're not going to lift that up in a hi, how you doing? You lift that up by asking them to tell you a story. And then when they're done telling you the story, you ask them follow-up questions about the story. And you can take the tact of my 4-year-old daughter who says why after everything you tell her. Use the 5 whys technique. Every time someone says, I don't know, I just like to come to church. Why? Well, I don't know, I guess the food's good. Why? Right? If that's the direction you're going to go, at least tell me what you like about the luncheon that we serve so that we can do more of it, right? Use the 5 whys technique to actually go a little bit deeper with them. I'm happy to send out interview resources afterwards. Also, if you want to spend some time on Google about how to create a good interview script, just research customer discovery interview scripts. There are so many ways to do it. We at Glean Network have also created a bunch of different primers and resources that we're happy to share with anybody who wants them on how to craft an interview script for the people that you seek to serve. But here's the last thing I want to say that ties back both the interview scripts and I Thou. And especially in this moment, right? And if you're watching this 10 years from now, and why does Elan keep referring to this moment? We're in the midst of a pandemic, right? The coronavirus has caused every single one of us in some ways to be socially isolated. Many of us are at home. Many people are alone at home. And what we're seeing in the world right now is essentially a tectonic shift around human connection. A tectonic shift around human connection. And we haven't, even before coronavirus happened, we already knew something like 50% of Americans report feeling socially isolated, right? And by the way, some of whom are members of congregations and still feel socially isolated. So let's, just to be clear, we are in a crisis of loneliness. We are in a crisis of anonymity. And we are in a crisis of unbelonging. And I think what we know just from the sociological data about what people are reporting and about what the opportunities are within our communities and beyond and between our communities is that people are going online, and they're going to CrossFit, and they're going to SoulCycle, and they're going to all of these other places seeking to feel known. Right? If you're watching this on an iPhone, or you have an iPhone, you should know, that Facebook, if you have the Facebook app or you have Amazon app or whatever, it's tracking where you go, and it's probably has a microphone on and is listening to the conversations. And by the way, every single one of us probably knows how to turn off those privacy features. But many people leave them on. Why? Because when you sign into Facebook and it says, Elan, how you doing today? Here are the 5 people whose birthdays it is. Make sure to reach out to them. By the way, do you remember this amazing thing that happened a year ago? Here's a picture of it. Wasn't that fun? Do you want to reconnect with your friends from that time a year ago? Or you go into Amazon and it says, Elan, how'd you like that book? Wasn't that a great book? Do you want to tell your friends about how, by the way, if you like that book, here's 10 books that you would love. These apps, these companies, they are built on their technology and their data and all, for all of the privacy issues that have come up about it, and thank God there's a backlash against it. What they allow you to do is to feel known. Every single time you sign in, wow, Facebook actually knows me. They remember my memories. They know who my friends are. They help me remember people's birthdays. Amazon really knows me. So what does that tell you? Right? It's absurd. Yanni's cracking up over here. He's spilled the tea all over the place. It's absurd that we can come to that conclusion, but what does it tell you? Or, oh, the CrossFit person really knows me because they know how much I lifted last week and how much I'm going to lift this week. The Soul Cycle person really knows me because when they lit the candle, they looked me right in the eyes and then lit the candle before class, right? And I'm not saying they don't know you, and every one of them should try to know you, and it's wonderful. But what it tells you is that people are dying to feel known. People are dying to feel named and known and to belong. And when you can sit across from somebody and for 45 minutes or 30 minutes or 20 minutes or however long it takes you to drink a cup of coffee, to remind them that they were created in the image of God, and even if it's just for those 20 minutes to sit inside of an I-thou relationship in which the divine spark is present, in which you treat their stories like scriptures and you treat their life like it is a piece of liturgy, that person will feel known. And for us in this day and age, and all the more so in this moment in light of Corona, that's our superpower. That's the superpower you have as an entrepreneur. That's a superpower you have as a faith leader, whether you're a lay person or a clergy person. In community, that is your superpower. There is nothing more powerful than that, than giving people the experience of being reminded that they were created in the divine image and of allowing them to feel known. So I want to invite everybody, whether you're watching it live, whether it's Yanni and Nora and Darnell and Kris, who was here before, or anybody who's watching this down the line, to set an intention. If you're watching this in the morning, set an intention for today. If you're watching this in the evening, set an intention for tomorrow. To step into one conversation. All it is one. Step into one conversation with the kind of presence and the kind of intentionality that you can create space for somebody to step into that conversation with you and feel whole and feel like they can show up with every aspect and feature of their identity, all the beauty, the scars, the warts, and everything in between, and treat that person like they were created in the divine image. And I don't care if it's someone you meet at the coffee shop or it's somebody in line, or even if it's a smile you give to the person who's stuck next to you in traffic. There's an opportunity to bring that divine spark into every one of our relationships at any moment. And I want to invite every single one of us to try to do that, even if you do it just once a day. And it's not just to feel good, and it's not just to spread love, both of which are incredibly important. But what actually it allows you to do is to serve those people in ways that you never thought imaginable. And that every single one of them, when they feel served, whatever it is you create based on what you learn from the interviews, that when they feel served, they can look at the way you serve them and imagine to themselves, oh my goodness, Yanni really understands me. Oh my goodness, Nora really got it. Oh my goodness, Darnell really understood what I said when I told that story about how I was struggling with whatever I was struggling. And if you can let someone feel like that, even if it's just for a fleeting moment, there's nothing that is out of the realm of possibility. I'll pause there. I know everyone's got places to go and urgent matters to attend to, but I want to thank all of you for being here with me and for pausing in the midst of this crisis to imagine that as powerless as we feel now, that we actually have a superpower and we can share it with abundance with one another and with the people in our communities and beyond. Thank you.
Elan, we give thanks for your witness. We give thanks for your words, for your wisdom. And as the MBA's work as the Disciples Health and Social Service Ministry, it is our prayer that all of our partners, all of our entrepreneurs would seek to embody such a practice, such a posture as we engage those that we are called to serve. And even those who are not engaged in social entrepreneurship and are our partners, but our disciples and our thoughtful people and our any tradition, that people would adopt such a value that we may transform our world to be one that has more compassion and more care for everyone. So we thank you, and I hope that you all will continue to explore the work of Elan through his work at Glean. He's doing some exciting work, and of course, Yanni knows that. And we want to continue to strengthen our collaborative arm at NBA. One of our core values is collaboration. So this is a step in that direction of being more collaborative and bringing in voices that are beyond our arena, that we may continue to amplify the various ways that God is moving across the lines of tradition and denomination. So we give thanks for you and continue prayers for you all as you all navigate this challenging time, but may we do so from an I, thou posture.
Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. And Darnell, you're going to send out the link so we can share this with people that weren't on today, because I can think of many who would enjoy it. I really, really, really appreciate all that you've done and all that you, Elan, had to say. Thank you so much.
I sure will. So give us a few days and I'll send out the link and you'll be able to find it on our website, nbacares.org.
Great. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Nice meeting everybody.